Welcome to another episode of the Freedom Filled Life. Today we're in Scottsboro, Alabama. Scottsboro, Alabama is basically known for a couple of different things. The first one, the one that we have talked about in the past, is unclaimed baggage, which is just down the street here. You can see the sign for it. But the other one is for, what you can see on this little sign here, the Scottsboro Boys. Scottsboro Boys we've read about in some of the markers and some of the other videos. So let's go into the museum, which is right behind me here in this former church, and we will see what we can learn about the Scottsboro Boys. The story of the Scottsboro Boys is really a tragic story. Let's start by looking at the 9 people in question. Clarence Norris, 19. Charles Weems, 20. Haywood Patterson, 18. Ozzie Powell, 16. Willie Robertson, 16. Eugene Williams, 13. Olin Montgomery, 17. Andy Wright, 19. Rory Wright, 14. The 9 defendants were not all strangers, but they also were not part of a gang. The Wright brothers, along with Patterson and Williams, were from Chattanooga, and they were friends. The other 5 were from Georgia. Norris and Weems met on the trip months earlier and were traveling together. So were Powell and Robertson. Montgomery was traveling by himself to Memphis to try to find an eye doctor to help with his poor eyesight. All were either illiterate or barely literate. Powell had 3 months of schooling, while Norris had completed the 2nd grade. Andy Wright had made it through the 6th grade, making him the most educated. Early on the morning of March 25, 1931, several vagrants snuck aboard a Southern freight train in Chattanooga. Approximately 1 hour into the ride, a fight broke out divided among race lines over space on a particular gondola car. Of the altercation, Patterson testified, "The white fellows got plenty sore at the whooping we gave them." 6 whites were either thrown off or in some way forced off the freighter. John Gleason, John Ferguson, Lindsay and Odell Gladwell, Lester Carter, and Orville Gilley. After stumbling their way back to the depot in Stevenson, Alabama, they reported the incident to authorities. In their complaint, they mentioned that 2 white women were on board, and this fact set in motion events that would become the most celebrated court case in the world. Word of the altercation and potential kidnapping of 2 white women spread quickly. Led by a local deputy sheriff, a posse formed in Paint Rock, 22 miles west of Scottsboro. The mob pulled the 9 boys from the train and then discovered Victoria Price and Ruby Bates, young mill workers from Huntsville, Alabama. Victoria and Ruby came off the train dressed in men's overalls. Victoria testified to wearing a shirt, 3 dressing, pair of step-ins, girl's coat, and girl's hat. The day of the arrest, it was about 50 degrees and would feel much colder on top of an open-air gondola car moving at 30 miles an hour, so the layers made sense. Wearing 3 dresses instead of carrying 2 also allowed Victoria to have her hands free, which would help in boarding, navigating the car, and perhaps even help fend off unwanted advances. In reality, the 2 girls were breaking the law by traveling on a train escorted, wearing men's clothing, and had worked as prostitutes in the hobo camp before returning to Huntsville. Victoria had been arrested for adultery several months before. In order to avoid trouble, Victoria convinced Ruby that the best course of action would be to accuse the young blacks of rape. Ruby recanted her story in 1933 and spent the next several years raising money for the defense team.
Eight black boys in a southern jail, world turned pale. 8 black boys and 1 white lie. Is it too much to die? Is it too much to die when immortal feet march with you down Time's street? When beyond still bars sound the deathless drums, like a mighty heartbeat as they come. Who comes? Christ, who fought alone. John Brown. That mad mob that tore the Bastille down, stone by stone. Moses, Joan d'Arc, Dessalines, Nat Turner, fighters for the free. Lenin with a flag blood red, not dead, not dead, none of those is dead. Gandhi, Sandino, Evangelista too. To walk with you, 8 black boys in a southern jail. World turned pale.
As the arrests were made, the boys thought it was because they had bloodied up some whites and that the mob was there to even the score. However, all 9 were charged with rape and assault, capital crimes that could lead to the death penalty. They were then driven back to Scottsboro, the seat of Jackson County. Sheriff Matt Wan stood on the jail's front stoop and threatened the mob outside to shoot the first man who attempted to pass in order to keep the boys safe. No one tested him. The state of Alabama tried the 9 prisoners in a series of 4 trials at the Jackson County Courthouse between April 6th and April 9th. The trials resulted in 9 convictions and 8 death sentences. As the lawyers met the boys mere hours before the trial, this led to the U.S. Supreme Court ruling of Powell v. Alabama in 1932, which overturned the guilty verdict, citing lack of adequate legal preparation. After the Supreme Court overturned the convictions, in 1933 the state re-indicted the 9, despite the lack of corroborating testimony, the surprise reversal by one of their accusers, and overwhelming medical evidence that ruled out the possibility of gang rape. All 9 were reconvicted. In Norris versus Alabama in 1935, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of the defendants a second time. The ruling held that the defendants' right to a trial by their peers was violated, as no person of color had ever served on a jury. In total, they spent 102 years in prison. Eugene Williams, 6 years. Charges were dropped. Roy Wright, 6 years. Charges were dropped. Willie Robertson, 6 years. Charges were dropped. Olin Montgomery, 6 years. Charges were dropped. Charlie Weems, 12 years. He was released and pardoned in 2013. Ozzie Powell, 15 years. Charges were dropped. Clarence Norris, 15 years. He broke parole and was pardoned in 1976. Haywood Patterson, 17 years. He escaped, but he was pardoned in 2013. Andy Wright, 19 years. He was released and pardoned in 2013.
Says in 1931, 2 white women falsely accused 9 young black hobos of raping them aboard a freight train traveling through northern Alabama. The 9 African American, ages 13 to 20, soon became known as the Scottsboro Boys. Over the next 7 years, the state of Alabama repeatedly tried and convicted the defendants, only to have the United States Supreme Court on 2 separate occasions overturn those convictions. Still, the innocent young men would spend a combined 102 years in prison for a crime that never happened. Well, I hope you learned something from our visit to the Scottsboro Boys Museum. It's kind of a tragic story how 9 lives were ruined by 2 young girls. And I mean, it's something that can still happen today. So we have to be careful what we say and what we accuse. And if we wrongfully accuse, you can see things can go dangerously wrong. So I hope you like this episode. And like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode of The Freedom Filled Life.